it was a struggle. And I didn't have language for it. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know that I was like grieving the loss of this life. I thought I was going to live. And side note, I was the one who imploded it in a lot of respects, right? But I think I didn't appreciate the extent to which my self-worth and value came from all these external things that I wanted nothing of.
Josh Goldberg had built a life that looked successful from the outside. An international career, corporate leadership roles, opportunities that had taken him around the world. But privately, things were beginning to unravel. His grandfather had died. His mother had been diagnosed with cancer. Years of sleeplessness and anxiety were catching up with him, and the life he had carefully constructed was beginning to feel hollow. Josh remembers sitting alone in his apartment, just a chair, a mattress, and a television, feeling like the emptiness in the room mirrored the emptiness in his life. Then a mentor handed him a book, Man's Search for Meaning. Josh says that moment may have saved his life. Here's his story.
You can do this job and be healthy in it.
People can actually grow as a result of their struggle.
This podcast shares real stories of transformation and explores what it means to live well through life's challenges.
Welcome to the Struggle Well podcast. I'm your host, Britt Myers, joined today by Josh Goldberg, CEO of Boulder Crest. And Josh, in our first episode, we talked about not asking other people to do something that we aren't willing to do first ourselves. So in that spirit, today we are starting with your story, your personal story. But I'm just curious why storytelling and stories are such a big part of who Boulder Crest is and the work that we do.
At the core of post-traumatic growth and at the core of where it came from, the origin of all of our work from Dr. Tedeschi was spending time with people who'd gone through great difficulty and just listening to them. And so I think that that's why stories matter. They matter because they are the mechanism through which we share our life experience and the wisdom that we gained. And I think it's important that, as you said, that as the host of the podcast, as the sometimes visitor to the podcast, that we are willing to go first. And I think it's also important for the two of us that we are not natives to this world. At least I'm not native. You've got more family connections than I do. Is the common question I get is like, why? We get you care. There's no question, but why? Mm-hmm. And so that people understand why this work is so meaningful to me and is something far greater than work to me, but really that it's a calling.
You ready to dive in on this?
I am ready.
Okay. Well, I feel like we got to start back at the beginning. Seems like a good place to begin. Where are you from? What part of the country did you grow up in?
So I was born about 45 minutes from here in Fairfax, Virginia. And then when I was a year old, we moved to Texas. So for those counting at home, that makes me a Texan through and through.
Does it?
Yes.
I don't know what the requirements are for that.
Yeah.
Okay. What were some of your early years like? You grew up in the Dallas area?
Grew up in the Dallas area. Liked baseball cards and books a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Big sports fan as well. And I like to tell people I grew up as an indoor Jewish kid. And then the idea being that I use my head and not my hands. And I think just enjoyed watching sports, playing sports, and doing, I think, relatively normal kid stuff. I did get into like some marginal trouble at times, but it's probably a pretty good kid, all things considered.
Grew up with both parents. What was your family life like?
Grew up with both parents. My mom took off work when my brother and I were very little, and then ended up substituting at the preschool I went to, and subsequently went on to be there for about 30 years. My dad was a physician who really was building his practice, and so he was gone a lot. And one of the funnier parts was he was our baseball coach, and they would always have these like little figurines they would make, and he would always have a pager on his like belt when they did it, because if he got paged, he had to go back to the hospital. And so but just he was gone a lot working and trying to build something, and so spent a lot of time with my mom and with my brother as well, who's a great older brother.
So older brother, you're the youngest.
I'm the youngest.
Okay.
By about 2 years.
Oh. Did your dad follow that typical doctor path and never take you guys actually to the doctor?
No, I just remember that we used to go to the hospital on Sunday so my mom could sleep in. So we would be sat at the nurse station. Sometimes we'd get to go on rounds, but when we were at the nurse station, invariably we would end up wrestling. And we were huge wrestling fans. And so invariably he would get back and the nurses would have to separate us. And because, at some point when you're wrestling, you cross that line when someone gets hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just remember the look of disappointment when he would come back and we would be separated by adults. And, but no, No, I think it's like he was a big male health advocate, still is. And so I think we picked up a lot of that. And he's also a urologist,
Okay.
which if you want to get bullied at school and
That's a
have your
good one.
dad do that per profession, he told us that we should tell people he was a plumber.
Mhm.
He just worked on people, not on the toilets and things. But yeah, it was like, there were some times when people would mock you and there's not a lot you can say to it. It's like, it's a true story that what your dad does. So
Yeah, you just have to roll with it. There is a doctor in Texas who's a urologist, and his name is Dr. Richard Chop.
I'm glad my dad's name is not that.
Yeah, so you dodged a bullet on that one, really.
You making that up?
No, that's true.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to him.
Yeah.
No disrespect to him. Sorry,
I
Dr.
mean,
Chop.
Yeah.
So you studied hard and worked hard.
Okay, so then did you stay in Texas after you graduated high school, or did you go somewhere different for college? Did you go to college?
I did. I always knew, and I think my brother did the same, that like the East Coast was sort of a sensibility that agreed with us. And so, and I can't speak too much to that. I was not going to talk badly about Texas. It was something about both of us. And I wanted to go to Georgetown and play basketball. And there's a friend of my brother's who was a big-time sports agent, and he once said to me that a bar mitzvah, which is when you're 13, is the age a Jewish kid realizes he's more likely to own the team than to play on it. And, of course, my dreams of playing at Georgetown were stamped out, and my dreams of going to Georgetown were stamped out by a terrible SAT-2 score on the Spanish test. But my brother went to Georgetown, and then I went to Tufts University up in Boston. And what both of us had wanted to study, and at that point we hadn't traveled at all, was we both were very, very interested in the world.
Mhm.
And so we did debate in high school at a very competitive level, which I think in part kind of really catalyzed that interest. And so I went to Tufts to study international relations and focus on the Middle East. And so thoroughly enjoyed that experience and did internships and trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I got the chance to be an intern at a sports agent firm,
Cool.
which I thought I wanted to do because if you can't play sports, then you could at least do this.
Mm-hmm.
And the prize for interning there, so I didn't get paid, was two things. One is I got to meet Bobby Orr, who's a legendary hockey player, amazing guy. And I my job as an intern was he asked me to clean this closet in the office. It was a mess.
Like, yes,
And I
Mr. Orr.
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was like, yes, sir. And I did the best job that anyone's ever seen of doing a closet. He came in and he was so happy. He's like, whatever you want. He's got a famous picture when he won the Stanley Cup, and he signed one for me, for my dad. So that was really cool. The other thing was I got to meet with the head sports agent.
Uh-huh.
So I go to meet him at the end of this internship, and I sit with him, and he's like, I heard you want to be a sports agent. I'm like, I do. And he goes, well, I only got one word of advice for you. I go, what's that? He goes, don't. He's like, I'm a professional babysitter for people who do dumb things, and I can't recommend it. He's like, you probably think I get paid a lot of money, but not enough to do this job.
He has like a bald spot in his
Yeah.
beard. He's been nervously picking
And
out.
he was like, I was up at 3:00 in the morning because one of our clients got arrested. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that's not what I'm going to do with my life. I interned at a real estate and investment firm because I thought that might be interesting. And I think I was blessed that I sort of had these ideas. I got the opportunity to sort of like exercise those ideas and realize that like, okay, I don't like this. I don't
Yeah.
like this. And I think you learn some skills as well in that process. And then as a kind of rising senior at college, Pierre Omidyar and Pam Omidyar, who started eBay, had gone to Tufts. And they had given money to the school to start a scholar program in the Citizenship and Public Service College, which is the first of its kind in the country. And I remember it came across in that old school version of email where you had to like log into like an MS-DOS screen or something. And I didn't do any extracurriculars at school. Like I worked and then I had interned and then I had studied. And I was like, this seems interesting. It was something about it. It was one of those moments in your life you don't spend a lot of time thinking about. So I applied and then I got it. And when I asked them what it was, they were like, well, we don't know. He gave us $10 million and said we had to get something done within like 2 months because he's a tech guy.
Did you
And,
get the $10 million?
So he didn't get anything. There was
Oh, okay.
nothing to the program. But that choice really, I think, sparked a lot of what happened next. And so it was this like relatively small thing and decision at the time that really, I think, planted a much bigger seed.
Okay, so then what? Where'd you go?
So I signed up for the scholar program and then I'm like, okay, well, what is this? And
Yeah.
then they're like, we don't know. And I'm like, okay, there's no money. You don't get any money. And it's like,
I
well,
thought that was the whole point of a scholarship.
principally.
Yeah.
But
Like,
that's not
this
why I
sounds-
applied for it. But I'm like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do to like honor this thing? And they're like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, all right, throw it
Like,
back
have
on
you
me.
seen my closets? They're
Exactly.
very clean.
Shit, could have been the original Marie Kondo.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, listen, I'm kind of intrigued by the idea that for a long time, companies were judged by what they did with the money they made, right?
Mhm.
So if you're Coca-Cola, how supportive are you in the world? And I felt like there was a shift happening, and it was more interesting to people how companies actually made their money, like looking at their supply chain and, where does Nike make their products, that kind of stuff. And they're like, that sounds great. And you're the only one with an idea, so you should go do that. And that just involved me like going to the library and researching things. So, but in the process, I think it really planted a seed, because when I was graduating in May of 2001, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Now, a lot of my friends did consulting gigs, so you get to go experience, similar to what I did with my internships, lots of different industries, figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
And they prepped me like nobody's business for these interviews, and just the math side of this stuff was just brutal. I mean, they'd ask you to, run these calculations, and it's like, this is, you're just looking at somebody and you're sweating, and
They're
like,
like,
this is not good.
7.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. They're like, no. And so I was like, that's not what I want to do, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do kind of with my life. And I had 2 opportunities come to me, both through friends. The first was to be a paralegal at the Department of Justice in their terrorism and violent crime section. Now, as a reminder, this is June of 2001.
Yeah.
So when I went in for the interview, 2 things were funny. One that you'll appreciate is must have been like 100 degrees in Washington that day. And I was in a suit, and I walked not very far from my brother to the DOJ building. And I was pouring in sweat by the time I walked in the door.
Perfect.
And I could not stop. And I'm sitting there being like, this is a top secret job to work on this stuff, and I can't stop sweating.
There's like all these human intelligence officers around just watching your body.
And I'm
cues.
in the bathroom because I'm like, oh, it's not like, smartphones. So like running my wrists under the sink, trying to like calm down. I can't. So I go into the office to meet this lady, and I'm like, hey, I just need to tell you something. I'm like, I'm not nervous. I'm just warm. And she's like, here, she gives me Kleenex, which then like leaves, splotches. So anyway, so that was my experience. But I did well enough on the interview that they offered me a job. And they were talking about indicting bin Laden in absentia for the Kenya and Tanzania bombings. And so like interesting stuff, but it wasn't like kinetic, right? Like if I had gone there on September 12th, it would have been a much different rhythm. And so it was $30,000 a year, and which is not enough money to live in DC. I would have to live on my brother's couch, who lived in DC at the time. And then you go to any law school you want to, like it's a golden ticket. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I don't want to go to law school. Never did, still don't. Like, just as like what you're offering me is
big
not interesting
problem.
to me.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other circumstance was that my best friend at college was an English guy, a guy named Michael. And we were going over to spring break to go to London and then go to Portugal, because his parents had bought a house in Portugal, which a lot of English people do on the coast.
Wait, pause. Did you assimilate his accent while you guys lived together? Because I feel like I do that when I'm around people with accents. I just inevitably start trying to, not on purpose. You didn't pick up any English accent?
No, and I can definitively say, because Ken Falk and Julia Falk are our founders, and Julia's English, and and it happens all the time. People somehow start to have an affect, and it is very unimpressive and also ask like, do you watch Downton Abbey, The Crown, etc. Like it's, I think we could do without that for our British friends. It's just a sort of public service note. And
but they're all buying homes in Portugal.
Well, it's Portugal, Spain, because England doesn't have a lot of sun, so they want some sun, right? So we're going to go over there for spring break, like March-ish time. And maybe in January, and this is a different time. This is like, we had laptops.
How are you paying for this?
So I think my parents paid for my flight over there maybe, and then they were paying the rest of it. And so in January, he's like, hey, can you send me your resume? I need one to use as an example. I'm like, sure. And I don't think anything of it. And then we're getting ready to go to the trip. And he says, you need to bring a suit. And I was like, why do I have to bring a suit? We're going to Portugal. Like, I don't need a bathing suit. And he's like, because you have an interview. I'm like, what do you mean I have an interview?
They're like, we want to see if you do that sweat thing again.
Right, exactly. It's fine to sweat on the beach.
Yeah.
And I was like, what do you mean I have an interview? He's like, well, so his dad ran a tobacco company, British American Tobacco. And he said, and my dad gave your resume in and they want to interview you. And I looked at him and I said, what kind of an asshole works at a tobacco company? And he said, my father. And he said, and he's not an asshole. He's paying for your spring break. So I get the suit and I go over there, and it was like 30-minute meetings with a bunch of different people.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like perfunctory, because I'm like, what? Like, this whole thing just is like, I don't totally comprehend it. Now, by the way, he wanted me to move to England because after college, he was moving back, and then we could like continue our collegiate fun and like being, so it was a good gesture.
Yeah.
So I get there and I probably met with 4 or 5 different people. And then I sat in an office of a guy named Adrian Marshall. And Adrian had been responsible for really marketing BAT's products when the wall fell in Russia.
Okay.
And there was some cigarette brand called Yaba Gold, and just a super interesting guy. And he had been tasked to figure out what their social responsibility strategy should be.
Right up your
And
alley.
he starts telling me about this. And I was like, this is so interesting. And their strategy was to take 13 countries around the world that were different, that represented different kinds of people, demographics, et cetera. And then to try to convene dialogues to get people to talk with them, which was hard because people don't trust tobacco companies, about what it would mean for them to be responsible. And I'm like, okay, so I really like international relations. I've been studying this thing about social responsibility. I could live in England. And they offered me a job. And I'm like, so anyway, we spent 4 hours meeting together. We canceled all the other appointments.
Did you ask them if you have to smoke the tobacco?
That was a time when they still gave managers like cigarettes, which was always a weird sort of, I was too junior
pay
for that,
them,
but it's
but
exactly, yeah, it's just a weird thing. So they offered me a job, and fast forward to the final discussions for that are taking place in the early part of September. And I'm supposed to start work on September, I think, 13th of 2001. And so every night I was staying up until like 4 a.m, and I would have discussions because I didn't want to go to bed and then wake up and try to like have a unclear head. So we would kind of iron out all the details of how this whole thing was going to work and all the rest of it. And we finally get done. And I'm supposed to be on a flight on Wednesday, September 12th. And I go to bed in the wee hours of September 11th. And my mom wakes me up however many hours later, and she says, there's an English person on the phone, and they want to talk to you. And I'm thinking, like, I just talked to these people. Like, what is this? And my buddy, Michael, is like, put the TV on right now. And so that was 9/11, obviously. That's how I felt when I woke up and found out what was happening. And then I ended up leaving on the first flight out of Dallas internationally to the UK on like Sunday, and the world was different, right? There was no one on the plane. I was upgraded. I had plastic fork and knife. Like, just you could feel that the world had shifted dramatically. And I went over to London, and I had an amazing experience that I think to this day has been really powerful. And one of the things they talked about was the idea that they were trying to shift as a company from a mindset of decide, announce, defend, where they would make decisions, tell the world, and then get attacked.
Yeah.
And really like a head in the sand strategy, and really to go to a strategy where they would listen, they would decide together, and they would deliver. And that's something that's always stuck with me from my first week on the job. And so I got the chance to be part of kind of how do you create spaces, which is very relevant to our podcast here. How do we create spaces where people will tell you what they genuinely think, where there's certainly emotion to it, but like you can connect with other human beings and understand what their worries and concerns are. And if you're doing a dialogue in Malawi, where at the time people were dying at 38 years old, they weren't worried about smoking cigarettes. They were worried because they were leaf farmers. There was no schools by the where the leaf was, and so their kids child labor was happening, and these kids couldn't get educated, and they did not want that for their children. So it's a vastly different conversation and a set of solutions. So I did that there for 2 years, and then London is a fascinating place to live. But it's like a continuation of college. I mean, the drinking culture. My mom would be like, what's it like? I'm like, well, in the U.S., you go meet someone for a coffee. In England, it's always meet someone for a beer, which is never one beer.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got to get out of here. And I just didn't feel like healthy.
Yeah.
Like, so
Imagine that.
they sent me to New Zealand. And I ended up working in New Zealand for about 2.5 years and getting the opportunity to kind of do some work on the ground, if you will. And it was a great experience. And then they would send me to Australia every quarter, where I fell in love with Sydney, which is still my favorite place on earth. It's sort of like a place to do R&R and just, be at peace, I guess I'd say.
Can you do an accent? No.
Shrimp on the babby.
That's okay. We can skip that
Thank
part.
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just keep that in. And then while I was in New Zealand, my grandfather died. Now, I did get the chance to, we knew when I saw him last, I think it was about 94, 93, that it was the last time I was going to see him. But still, I couldn't get back. She was get buried within 48 hours, and I couldn't make it back for the funeral. And then my uncle died suddenly. And my mom has had cancer since I was in college. She was supposed to die in 2003, and she's still alive in 2026. But I felt like the next shoe that was going to drop was going to be something's going to happen with my mom, and I was going to be so far away and really feel selfish and guilty and never be able to kind of address that. And so I started to talk to the company about could I get closer? And we started to have conversations. They were very, very kind and very, very gracious. We were looking at London, looking at Mexico. And then in 2005 for Thanksgiving, I came back in the midst of all this just to see my folks and see my family and my friends. And in a very short period of time, like my life changed dramatically. And I feel like I've lived a serendipitous life and a very like fortunate life, blessed life. So I get back and the flight was, it's brutal. It's 24-hour, 28-hour journey, sitting in the back, kids screaming, all the rest. It was a long trip. And I get back and then probably landed on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, my brother asked me to go to the Cowboy game because he had a buddy who worked at Exxon, and Exxon had a box, and I knew, quote unquote, how to talk to those people, meaning like corporate types.
Yeah.
And so I go and I'm talking to them, and I'm jet lagged as all get out.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to watch the game, but I can't because I'm talking to these people. And then that night, I ended up going over to a buddy of mine's house, and I met his sister.
Mm-hmm.
And so like in less than 24 hours, maybe it was 10 hours, 12 hours, basically like the next step of my life was very clear that I was going to go work at Exxon and then sort of be in relationship with this woman. And so it's kind of the interesting journey of how it all played out.
Yeah. The Cowboys, that was the tipping point, huh?
Yeah.
It was another long 24 hours, I bet. It's probably worse than the flight.
You mean just because the Cowboys aren't very good? I don't remember if they won or not.
We'll just assume no. I don't know.
Okay.
Wait, what year is this?
05.
Oh, okay. You might have won.
Maybe.
Yeah, it was probably good.
It was like Romo era.
Yeah. So now
Maybe.
you're...
Could have been like Chad Hutchinson. It could have been a bad, yeah.
We don't know.
Rough times.
Yeah. But you're back in Dallas area.
So
near your family.
So I'm back in Dallas,
okay,
working at Exxon at the headquarters, dating this woman. And the funny part was the State of the Union, which I think happens in February. George W. Bush, who was, considered close to the oil companies, he comes out and says that America is addicted to oil in that State of the Union early 2000s. So like, of course, I'm getting all these emails and messages, people being like, oh, hey, great work, right? You traded tobacco for oil, addictive products. And I was like, this is amazing. And when I went to work at Exxon, which is super interesting, they were starting to make a ton of money, like more money than anyone had ever made in a year. And so it was an interesting place to do like public and affairs, communication, social responsibility. They just merged not that long before and were really metabolizing kind of the ExxonMobil side of that. Mm-hmm. And it was a really interesting place to work, a meaningful place to work, and like a very suit and tie, very formal place to work.
Yeah, I bet.
So
yeah. How long was that period that you were there? And you were married at this point?
So I started working there in probably March of 06 and then got married in October of 08.
Okay.
And that was right on the precipice of the world collapsing economically.
I remember I was graduating from college into the worst
Yep.
economy of all time.
But it was like people were dropping like flies. Like people would be like, hey, I can't come to the wedding because my company is about to go to hell.
Funny, but yeah.
And so went on honeymoon, come back. My wife at the time got transferred from real estate where she was working on Lehman Brothers deals to Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. And I was working a range of different gigs. I had 6 jobs in 6 years at Exxon, and which is cool. Like it was a good experience to get to kind of do different things. But I started to have an international job, and essentially we never saw each other. I mean, lawyers work a lot of hours. And I think if I like zoomed out, the truth is I never really wanted to be married. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself working in a corporate job, right, which at a company where you work there forever. Like I was a very rare person that they hired who did not start at Exxon. They like to have you intern, they like to start, train you up.
Yeah.
And so I'm working at this place and get married in 08 and just kind of like going through, maybe not into the motions, but maybe, like just performing and producing and the rest of it, but not reflecting a lot on life. And I think it was probably in 2011 that I feel like my wife at the time and I had like a normal interaction, a normal sort of Friday night interaction, which is you're sitting in the house on the couch talking and having a glass of wine and just decompressing and having a conversation. And she looked at me and said, is this how you want to spend the rest of your life? In her, what she was kind of indicating was that she wanted me to go work somewhere else where maybe I could make more money and there was a better career path. And I looked at her and I was like, I don't know. Like I haven't thought about it. And I would say in general, because like I would, I want to get closer to home, and then all this good stuff happens. Like that's generally like my brother and I had a big, we duked it out at the Aberdeen Steakhouse in like Leicester Square one time where he was yelling at me that I, let things happen and didn't make things happen. No,
I
which I
thought
still
you
appreciate.
were wrestling again. I was like,
no,
geez.
Wrestling verbally.
Oh, okay.
And I said, I don't know. And so I called my brother, who's just, like I said, a big influence in my life. And I was like, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. So we talked through some things. And I spent a lot of time reflecting on like what I was good at, and what I wasn't, what different kind of professions there were in the world. I talked to a couple of headhunters that were friends of his just about the world and job market and all the rest of it. And then my brother said to me, hey, why don't you look? And I think it was LinkedIn at the time. I've tried to figure it out, but I think that makes sense to me. But he was like, basically look at like anybody I know, and he knows a lot of people, like I'll introduce you to him. You can go talk to him. And so I remember looking at all these people and creating and just picking a cross-section of people who worked in lots of different fields. Mm-hmm. And I would go have coffee with them in LA and in New York, all over the place. And I would just sit and I'd say, how did you get here? And they would tell me these amazing stories. Mm-hmm. And the stories didn't make sense. They weren't linear. It wasn't like this built on this. It was like all over the place.
Yeah.
And the one thing I took from all of those conversations across this cross-section of humanity was every single one of those people were deeply alive. Like they were vibrant. They were vital. I remember this one dude, Courtney Holt, who had helped start, I think, a thing called Maker Studios. And Courtney was just like, the biggest problem I have is making sure that I'm not so impassioned by what I do that I forget to spend time with my family. Mm-hmm. And he's like, and he talks to me about this idea of Steve Jobs, that you have jobs, careers, and callings. And when you have callings, you just lack balance in your life. And so I'm meeting with all these people who, by happenstance, that I had chosen to meet with, who like had callings. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like dead inside. And I'm a big fan of rap music. Grew up listening to like NWA on the way to school and a lot of Tupac. And Tupac said, death isn't the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside while still alive. Mm. And I just was like, oh my God, like I've kind of sleepwalked through life, made choices driven by what I thought I was supposed to do and what was sort of in front of me at that moment. And none of it feels true. Mm-hmm. Like none of it resonates with anything inside of me. Like it doesn't, I get some like fleeting glimpses of joy or whatever it is, but like this is not my life. I don't know whose life it is, but it ain't mine. And I thought about the Truman Show, this idea of being like an actor in the movie of your life. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, what do you do with this? And so I started to have some, interesting conversations with people about potentially going to try to do something else. And I was asked to go see a guy in the context of that named Mort Meyerson. And Mort had run Ross Perot's companies. And what I had heard about him was he could be gruff and was like kind of a hard guy. Mm-hmm. And I remember I didn't know what to wear to this meeting. And I didn't even know what this meeting was. I was just told that you need to go see Mort. And so I had like a white dress shirt on and like probably dress pants.
Not a suit.
Not a suit.
Okay.
So I was trying to be like a little more casual.
Yeah.
And I walk into his office and like he's sitting in this like, it's super cool office, but sitting in this like kind of glass conference room. And I walk in and I'm standing up and he's sitting down. And he has my resume in front of him.
Oh boy.
And he goes, what do you want? And I looked at him, and I'm really grateful I said this. I said, I want you to see me for who I am and what I'm capable of and not what's on that piece of paper. And he said, good, sit down. And whatever test I passed, that it wasn't some stuffy thing, we sat and just talked about life. And one of the things Mort said to me is like, lots of people get their first job because they need a job, because they have debt or they just need to make money. And 20 years later, they forget that that's the reason they're working at the place they're working. Yeah. And they hate their lives. And so Mort ended up offering me a job to come and work at his family office. They had tried to start this company and they wanted me to help. And it was like this ticket to freedom is, I guess, the best way to say it. I can't say that the company was that interesting to me, but the opportunity. And I think what I looked at it, I was like, the challenge of working at a place like Exxon, with all due respect to all my friends who work there and the amazing training I got, is it's a safe place to work. And what you're trading, in my estimation, is your potential for security. Because you're never going to max your potential out, because there are just limits in which you operate within, especially if you're in like a support function like I was, like public and government affairs. We're not drilling wells. We're not like the guy in Landman, right? We're not doing cool stuff.
Good reference.
We're like, spin doctors kind of stuff. Yeah. And so I just had this thought, and that was the same time that I think my brother ended up getting married that summer. My best friend got married, and then we were having issues in our marriage. I think in part because of some of the choices like that, I was deciding that I needed to go a different track. And so what became clear to me, and I think, frankly, not to speak too much for her, but to my wife at the time, was that we were both pretty solid actors in movies that were supposed to be our lives, and that what we were doing, all of it, wasn't what we were supposed to be doing. We didn't have kids, so we got divorced, and parts of that were very beautiful. In terms of all the things you don't say in a relationship because you're trying to like maintain peace, or all the stuff you do, like you said, you don't talk about. And like we'd like literally a debrief of like arguments. Like it's like, oh, I'm really sorry, that was stupid. Like I don't know why I did that or why I picked that fight. And so I get divorced, and I think the reality of the choices and the decisions I had made like hit me hard. And the day I left Exxon, I actually saw bars on the window of the building. So it was like I was getting, liberated and I was free. But it was also probably the most destabilizing thing I've chosen to do. And I chose to do a lot all at the same time, which for those keeping notes at home, I don't recommend changing all the things all at once, but I'm impulsive and I made a decision. And so it was like, all right, let's rip the Band-Aid off and tear it down and figure out what it looks like.
Which is interesting because her question to you kind of set you on that different path of like, is this really how you want to live? And it wasn't. You decided it wasn't. But unfortunately, that also meant this relationship you had with her and this kind of performative life you felt like you were living. So I'm sure that there was a lot probably to that even for her.
Yeah, there's lots of ripples to it, right? And then and I love my in-laws, and like I'm probably never going to talk to these people again, right? There's just a lot in a 7-year relationship and a 4-year marriage, even though it's short, that you're like, okay. It's challenging. And I think the other piece of it was, and one of the sort of seminal moments is I moved to a townhouse about 2 blocks away, in part because I wanted to be close to the gym. And I remember like the first night I was there, and all I had was a mattress, like the box springs, the bed hadn't come in. I had a chair, not different than the ones we're sitting in now. And then I had a TV. That was it. And I was sitting in the dark staring at like the TV, and I'm like, oh my God, like kind of what have I done?
The reality,
right? Like I basically like kind of fell through the floor of life and was in like some version of hell. And it was a struggle. Like, and I didn't have language for it. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know that I was like grieving the loss of this life. I thought I was going to live. And side note, I was the one who imploded it in a lot of respects, right? But I think I didn't appreciate the extent to which my self-worth and value came from all these external things that I wanted nothing of. Mm-hmm. And so I remember that in this house, I lived by myself, and I had 7 TVs. I don't know why. I don't really watch that much TV, but I had 7 TVs. I had surround sound in every room, which I think was already in the house. But I just remember that like any time it was quiet, it was scary. Mm. And so even right before bed, I'd have music on to try to avoid having to confront any thoughts, because the thoughts were not good. And having panic attacks, can't sleep, getting home from work and having to have a drink to just like take the edge off. There were some weird, crazy things. Like I was watching the season of Mad Men, and it was the season of Mad Men when Don Draper was drinking too much. Mm-hmm. And then they finally had this like intervention with him, like, you're a Met. And I was like literally watching this. I'm like, my life is on the TV. I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I'm not saying I look like John Hamm. He's a very handsome guy. But I'm like, this is crazy that this is like my life right now. And I just like was fighting the good fight. I went to talk to 2 different therapists, because I confided in somebody. I said, hey, like I'm really not, doing very well. And he's like, okay, we'll go see this guy. So I go see this guy, and this guy like would sit in this lazy boy reclined. I'd walk into the office, and he was just such an asshole. And after 4 appointments of 45-minute sessions that were costing me $250 out of pocket each, I was like, hey, I'm not going to come back again. And he's like, why not? And I was like, because the world's kicking my ass right now, and I don't need to pay you $250 to jump on the bandwagon. I'm like, I can get that for free. And then I went to another therapist, and she would just sit there and not say anything, which was just strange. And so I took the habit of just like making notes for myself about different things that popped into my head. And I would I kind of call it like an early version of WeWork. I basically rented a space once a week, and I would just talk to myself because I wasn't getting any feedback. And I got prescribed alprazolam, which basically is Xanax, and I would take it. And then if I was at work, it was like you just had this weird zombie-ish feel that you weren't normal, like you weren't reacting normally. So like it made you more anxious in a different way.
Yeah.
And I just got to this place where I was like, I can't sleep. I can't figure this out. I don't know what's happening. I don't really feel like I can feel. And I'm exhausted. Like I was totally wiped out. I was exhausted. And like in my mind, I was like, okay, you got like 2 or 3 weeks to try to figure this out. And if you can't, then you gotta end it. And maybe if you're lucky, because we don't know what happens when we die, that you press the reset button and you get to start your life over again. I don't know. But that's all I was thinking about was like, I'm just exhausted and worn out and I'm just going to end my life. And some point in that window of time, Mort came up to me and he said, hey, I think you need to read this. And he put a book on my desk and it was called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I was like, okay, thanks, Mort. I went home that night and I remember I was like, the bed was made. I was like laying on the bed reading it and I just read it all the way through. And it was the first piercing of light in this like just complete fog that I felt trapped in. And I was like, this makes sense to me. This person who had been through the Holocaust and lost his parents, lost his wife, like he understood and that there was something in this for me. So the two thoughts I had when I read it were, one, I'm not a victim to what I'm experiencing. And although in many ways, good things have happened to me in my life, that I was going to have to make things happen. I was going to have to find meaning in a moment, in a day, in a week, that it was my task. And Frankl talks about that you aren't the person who gets to ask the questions, you're the person who has to answer them. And so whatever you believe, whether it's God or whatever it was, whoever is putting these questions in front of you, you don't get to bemoan the question and say, well, why is this happening? You don't get to answer a question with a question. You have to find the answer. And then the second thought I had was that I was trapped in this sort of system where all the time I was trying to figure out if I felt better. And so you get a little bit obsessed with your struggle. And it was like the best way to get out of that system was to help somebody else. And Mort had taken us to a food bank, maybe not long before that. And I remember just standing next to him talking and just stuffing boxes with like grits and things. And I actually felt decent that day. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe this is what I should do. I should try to help somebody. And, we talked about the Cowboys earlier. And then a couple weeks later, I was in LA. I was having dinner with my brother. He's like, hey, I'm going to have a friend join. And she was working with a guy on the Cowboys whose wife's brother had died in Afghanistan as a Marine. And she goes, hey, like, I don't really know how to help them with what they're trying to do. Would you mind meeting with them? And I obviously had a lot of social responsibility experience from time at Exxon, time at Tobacco. And I was like, of course, like I'm going to meet with the guy on the Cowboys. There's no doubt about that, right?
Yeah.
And so I went and had lunch with Derek and Emma and talked about what they were trying to do, which is to start a nonprofit that would raise money and give it out to veterans causes. And I was just struck by how kind and gracious and like loving and just amazing human beings they were. And of course, like what got me there was like I wanted to meet a guy on the Cowboys, but what kept me there was like just these amazing people who live 45 minutes from where we're sitting right now. And I remember I said to them, I was like, I would love to help you, but I don't know anything about veterans.
Yeah.
And so can you send me stuff? So they must have sent me like hundreds and hundreds of pages of research on like education, healthcare, employment, all of the different challenges that veterans were facing and because they wanted to create a paradigm for like, how would you give money out to different groups and what causes would you focus on? And then I started reading about mental health and suicide. And I just was like, well, I don't know what it's like to be in the military, but I know what it's like to want to kill yourself. And there was one article in particular, it was like excerpts of suicide notes that kids had written their parents. And I just remember I was like, well, shit, I could write any one of these letters. Could have written any of them. And so I started helping them. And every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, someone would email me or call me and say, I heard you help veterans groups. Can you help us? And I was like, I don't know what's happening, but I think I should just say yes. And so I did. I wasn't like, I was working for more, but then I was doing this. And I started helping all these different groups. And, there was a bit of a spark coming back into my life in a meaningful way, I think.
That's what I was going to ask is like, I don't know, it's like hard not to get choked up like sitting beside you today, like how it could have been two different paths. And I don't know, there was something just like so stark about how you were saying you were just like laying on this made bed and like just kind of devoured that Man's Search for Meaning book. But it's also, it just says so much about you that you just like found your purpose through, or maybe like getting to the next day by helping somebody else. But that's what was really standing out to me. What you were talking about there is not getting up necessarily for yourself or like what you wanted to do that day, but to help someone else, which is still who you are today.
And it's interesting. Like I think two things. One is when you're in the midst of all that, like you certainly like you're loved and you have connections and relationships, but it's like you don't see it, And I think probably the lowest point of my life is Thanksgiving of 2012. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday, right? I get to eat pecan pie, which I try to only do once a year. Get to watch the Cowboys.
Mine too. It's my birthday. Usually.
There you
close.
go.
Mm-hmm.
And the day after Thanksgiving, I was moving into this townhome, and my best friend, Michael, the English guy, and his wife and his little boy were coming over because they knew that I just wasn't in a great place and it was a hard time. And we're sitting around this table, and it's, my parents and then my brother and his wife and my best friend and his wife and their kid. And we do a normal family tradition of what are you thankful for? And I just remember it coming to me and just saying, like looking down at me like I pass. And the idea that in all of that, right, whether it's, I told you my mom was supposed to be dead by then and, you're still alive. And so you still have the chance to do things, but you just can't see any of it. And it was brutal, right? Brutal to think that you get to such a dark place where you can't appreciate anything. And obviously it provides a really meaningful bookend, because one of the things that's interesting about life, and maybe it's just the journey of post-traumatic growth, is I talk about this stuff with you, but it's as if I'm telling somebody else's story. It's like you get to this point where it's like you really have these prior versions, like this 1.0 version of you where you're like, okay, there's a 1.0, and then there's this whole valley of despair for the 2.0. But like I have a great deal of compassion for that version of me.
Me too.
That didn't know a lot. And so, I'm helping these different groups, and I'm starting to feel better. And then there's these people in your lives who have, nuggets of wisdom that are really powerful. And I remember it was probably May of 2013. I went to New York and I was pretty lost. And we went for a walk on the High Line. It was my brother and a friend of his, and then my sister-in-law and me. And her and I were just talking, and she was like, I think you need to go on a walkabout. And I was like, what's a walkabout? And she was like, just go wander. And it's an Aboriginal tradition. And I was like, that's exactly what I need to do. So I went on the plane home, and I took out a map from, the back of the in-flight magazine, and I was like, where am I going to go? And so I went and marked all these places, and I was like, I'm going to go somewhere I've been, somewhere I haven't been. And I got back, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I had this quote from Joseph Campbell on my phone, and it said, as you go the way of life, you will see a great chasm. Jump. It's never as wide as you think. Because I had this sense that I was like gearing up for this adventure. So I walked in, and Ian was the guy who ran Mort's office, and I sat down with him. I was like, hey man, like I'm not doing good. And like, the parts of the story that choke you up are the parts of like just the kindness of human beings who could have gone any direction. To your point about like there's, this forks in the road, and he could not have been like kinder or more gracious. And this is the same guy who, when my wife at the time and I decided to get divorced, and it was hard to say the word divorce, like hard. And I texted him or called him, and I was like, hey, I just need a day. So I took a day, and I came in the next day, and he's like, let's go for a walk. We went for a walk on this Katy Trail, which is right where the building was. And then at some point after walking in silence, he stopped and he looked at me and said, Josh, the best part of getting divorced? I was like, what are you talking? Like, what? Like, this is a weird, the question didn't make sense.
Yeah.
I said, no, Ian, I don't know the best part of getting divorced. He's like, you can go wherever you want to go, and you can be whoever you want to be. And we talk about this podcast being a forum to like share experience. Well, he had gotten divorced, and that's what he did. And so he was sharing with me this idea that like maybe there was no hope today.
Yeah.
But there was hope. There was an opportunity here. And I've shared with him like many times how important and meaningful that was. So I went to see Ian. It's like, I need to go away. And he was like, cool, like take a leave. We'll make sure you have your insurance and the rest of it. And he said, but you have to go see Mort. And so I scheduled time to go see Mort on Sunday to go to his house. And Mort had a super cool house. And Mort passed away, I think at this point, maybe 4 months ago from today when we're recording this. And I went to see him, and his house was a converted former substation, a power substation. It was just like it was just amazingly interesting, man. And I went to see him, And I told him, just like, the people you can choose to be vulnerable with. And this is, I found these two therapists to be really woeful. And then I found like Ian and Mort to be, and for all the kind of thought that Mort is like a hard guy, it's just like so kind. And I just told him, and he's like, you're right. It's like, you're not okay. He's like, you're really, really depressed. And he said, but you're going to figure this out. And it's going to take you between 3 months and 3 years, but you're going to figure this out. I don't know where the timeline came from, but he said to me, he said, I don't care what you do. I just want you to be happy. And like, why? Like, I work for him, so he should care what I do. But to have somebody show you this unconditional regard and love and provide hope all in the same thing. And I sent a letter to his family when he passed, and I just was like, just so we're clear, there's probably a lot of stories you're getting because he was an amazing businessman. I said, but your dad saved my life. And I got to share that with them. So I go on this trip around the world and eat, pray, love, if you will. Judge me if you will.
How much pasta did you eat?
There's not a lot of pasta. Actually, no, not a lot of pasta, but like other random dishes. And I go on this trip, and then I get back after 3 months of being away, and I go to see Mort. And I sat with him, and I said, hey, like, I don't think I'm going to come back, but you saved my life. And he's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm like, Mort, you saved my life. I said, you gave me Man's Search for Meaning. I said, and you said words to me that I don't know that I've ever heard in my life. And he said, Josh, when you walked out of here, after we talked in my house, he's like, I had this vision of you. I think it's parasailing, when you like jump off the cliff with a parachute. I think it's parasailing.
That's the boat one.
I don't know, whatever that one's called. We'll just call it parasailing, paraglide. Because there's paragliding, which is the glider.
Oh, okay.
So, but it's parasailing, I think. And he said, I had this vision of you parasailing and like running off the side of a cliff. And he said, a lot of people crash. And he said, it sounds like you're flying. And I pulled out my iPad and I was like, Mort, the last thing I did on my trip? And he goes, what? I go, I ran off the side of a cliff in Argentina. And I was like, we flew for 18 minutes, longer than the guy had ever flown. It was a tandem, obviously. I wasn't doing it by myself. And we just started crying. And I was like, good Lord, I don't know what the hell's happening, but something's happening. And so I walked out of there, and then I helped in these groups, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, and I needed to get out of Dallas at that point. Got a job offer, an interview opportunity in LA. So I called a group I was involved with out there. I was like, hey, like, you guys have any programs I could schedule this interview around? I'll come see you guys for a day or two and then go. I'm like, yeah, so we schedule it. This is like October of 13. And then I get out there, and I meet this dude who could best be described as a modern day Spartan, like white goatee, giant arms, warrior tattoos up on his arms, 82nd Airborne retired.
Oh boy.
It was Dusty. Yeah. And Dusty would end up running our Virginia location for many years. And he's talking to me, and he lived in Australia, so we're talking about all that, and then asked me questions, because it's like, if you zoom out of this situation, it's like, what the hell am I doing there, right? Like, these are veterans who are helping other veterans. It's like, there's some random ass guy from, like, doesn't make a lot of sense. And at the end of our conversation of 20, 25 minutes, and I remember leaning against this tree, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, Josh, you seem like a well-meaning young man. You seem like you could help a lot of my brothers and sisters, but before you do anything for anyone else, you got to do one thing for me. And I was like, what's that? And he said, I'll just reenact it.
Yes.
He said, you, sir, are going to unfuck yourself. And in that moment, I felt deep relief, because while I certainly felt better, like I could sleep a little bit, panic attacks gone away, I was still fucked up. Make no mistake about it. I hadn't dealt with any of the issues. I was really using service as a mechanism to make myself feel better. And they call it like helper's high and these kinds of things. Yeah. And this is what we don't advise here at Boulder Crest. Like, you got to hurt people. At some point, right, you lose sight of boundaries and all these other things. So he says this to me, and I'm like, yeah, this is true. And I looked at him, I was like, how does the unfucking process begin? And he was like, well, do what you see us doing, do what we tell you to do, and you'll figure it out. And I kind of like, in the same spirit of Mort, right? It's like, people aren't going to tell you what to do, but you figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I got the opportunity to go through some things, and I think to reflect on why I made the choices that I made, my upbringing and the impact that had on that, and why I was driven the way I was driven, why I got to the places I got to. I got to learn how to meditate, which, back to this whole weird Mad Men thing, is at the end of the season, the last episode, he's meditating and like has found peace,
the
right?
Coca-Cola ad, but
exactly.
Yes.
But I was meditating, And it was the first time I felt like complete peace. It was amazing. It was amazing. And since that day, in October 2013, I meditate every day, twice a day, religiously or spiritually, perhaps. And so I got the chance to, like, I think, make sense of all my experiences. I grieve a lot of stuff that I had never really reflected on. I know I cried a lot when I was out there. And I was in this home, this lady named Rosemary. And in her home, she had this sign or poster, and it was a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Vietnamese monk. And it said, "I have arrived, I am home." And I remember just staring at that and like feeling that was this. And I was with these other veterans, and we were each talking. And I remember talking, and like as I was talking to them, just like having this sort of epiphany of like, this is what you're supposed to do with your life. And I was like, I was here in between going to go interview at like a public affairs firm. And so I think I found what I was looking for when I really wasn't looking, because I was just helping as a practice to try to figure out what I should do with my life. And it turned out that was actually the thing. And I spent a number of months out in California. I slept on couches. I had no money. A dear friend of mine who doesn't work there anymore, her company had Kind bars in their like cafeteria or whatever, canteen.
Yeah.
And she would mail me boxes of Kind bars. So that's what I ate for meals, because I didn't have any money. And California is not a cheap place.
Can you still eat them today, or did it
Yeah,
ruin
no,
them? Oh,
they're-
perfect.
it's a very,
Little
very
plug for
well-designed
Kind
product.
bars.
Exactly.
Yes.
Go Kind bars. And I stayed out there, and I just spent time, and it reminded me of like all the way back to the work we did in England, where it's like you're just trying to understand what's happening. You don't have a preconceived notion. You're just listening. And then I thought like, I studied international relations. What's that about? The study of culture, but not projecting your own understanding on culture. It's just the study of culture. And so it's like, wow, like I'm trying to understand what's happening. And I do it with this beginner's mind, listening to people. And then Ken Falk's name kept coming up. And people kept saying, well, you should meet this guy, Ken Falk. You guys would get along so well. And Ken came out to California in November of 2013. And I was struck with laryngitis.
Perfect.
And as one could tell, I don't have a problem talking. And so I could not speak at all, like at all. And so we met, and there was four of us. We went to dinner. And Ken was talking, and I was like, this guy's like really impressive. He's high integrity. He's just like a good human. And he said, hey, when you get your voice back and you're on the East Coast, come and see me. And
were you like, I love you?
No.
Ken? Oh.
I was impressed.
Mm-hmm.
And the day after Christmas in 2013, I was on the East Coast. I came to see him and Julia. And then they were like late from a holiday party. And I just remember that when I pulled up into their house, I was just struck by the stars. It was just this like beautiful, and their house was obviously part of what was the 200 acres that they donated, the 37 acres, but just struck by the sky. And they got home. Canada had a scotch. We talked for a bit, met Julia, and then went to sleep, woke up, ate breakfast, and then we must have talked for, my recollection is 10 hours. We had like 3 Tic Tacs and 2 glasses of water and 1 bathroom break. And what we talked about was sort of, Ken had been involved in going to the hospital since 2004.
Yeah.
And what our perspective was on this challenge around sort of transition as well as around mental health. And I think where we both came at it was we had a systems-based approach, which is that when an individual's struggling, it's not a reflection on that individual. It's a reflection on the system that individual is trying to navigate and is a part of. And that these cultures and systems were getting the outcomes they were perfectly designed to get. And that's the military culture, the mental health culture. The systems aren't working. And that's why 1/3 of people are struggling. And that's why all these people are taking their lives. We kept talking, and then we met again in New York in like March. And he said, would you be willing to move to Virginia? And I was like, well, I was born there. So I guess if I'm like restarting my entire life because I got the first go round wrong, or, learned a lot of lessons, but I didn't do it right, then I might as well go back to where I started. And so we had this fateful dinner, and like on my birthday, on my 36th birthday, I'm like sitting at this table with all these random people I just really met. I'm like, this is so crazy how life like does this, right? And I felt so blessed by the good fortune and the people that have shown up in my lives. And they say, when you're ready, a teacher will appear. And that's what's happened. And so I lived with Ken and Julia for a few months, moved to Arlington for a bit. And then was working at this company that Ken had created that was focused really on like lessons learned and helping wounded personnel. And I remember I just had this epiphany when I was flying out to California to go do a talk that I was at the wrong place, like that I was supposed to be working at Boulder Crest. And so I came back, and it was November. It was right before or right after Thanksgiving. And I had done a whole bunch of homework, like 50 pages. I had memos, I had spreadsheets to like, how would you pay for me and all these things. And I remember I just sat with Ken. I was like, hey, man, I'm at the wrong place. And I remember I said, when I'm doing stuff for Boulder Crest, which I would do at night, I said, I feel like I'm using 90%. They say the average human uses 10% of their intelligence. So like when I'm doing stuff for Boulder Crest, I feel like I'm using 95% of my intelligence. And I really think that that's where I belong. And he's just like, okay. And so it was like I had done all this homework, and it was just like totally, it was just like, okay, why don't you start on January 1st? And I was like, all right, we'll do that.
Thanksgiving, though.
Exactly.
How cool.
So anyway, so all of these things connect. And then, and then I started working full time at Boulder Crest, and at that time, we had started Warrior Path, and we were figuring out what we were going to be, and it was clear that the original idea, which was pretty low key, host families for half the year, host other programs, wasn't going to be what our future was. And then we would encounter challenges and opportunities, and get to meet Dr. Tedeschi and Dr. Moore, and just it's just kind of an amazing journey to how it all like played out. And then getting to do that with Ken. We started the Institute in 2018, got Arizona in 2017, and then I remember in 2021, late in 2021, I lived next door to him and Julia, and he called me over to the fire pit on a Sunday, and he was like, listen, I think we need a full-time CEO, and it's not going to be me because I've done like the Navy thing. I did the AT Solutions thing. I started 2 nonprofits. And he's like, this is a young man's game, this entrepreneur stuff. And it's like, I want it to be you. And I was like, holy cow, like, and I would have been very content to run the Institute and do the stuff we were doing. And I was like, okay. And we just had a conversation, and it's crazy. It's to be able to rewind time and to know that there was a time in my life when I had nothing to be grateful for. And it wasn't that I woke up a certain way just because I wasn't sleeping. And then to wake up every day and be like, oh my God, like yesterday, I woke up at 2:30 in the morning. I was in Spokane by the airport, and I had to fly home. And it's like, but every day, like, it's just exciting to wake up and be like, oh, I can't believe I get to do X and Y and Z and all these sorts of things. And so it's just this amazing blessing and journey. And I think one of the things that I've found interesting about it is I feel like even in the depths of my struggle, when one of the things they talk about with struggle is like you lose the capacity to observe yourself. Like your life is so overcome by struggle. And I don't like kind of the talk of mental illness, if you will, but like it's one of the challenges, like you lose the capacity to observe yourself. You just become fully immersed in it. Is I feel like there was always a part of me that was observing what was happening. And to be able to remember that and to know that, and so that when I meet people who are struggling, it's like I have not lost touch with those very, very dark parts of my experience. But so I feel like I can relate and connect on that basis. And for me, we have something like 86 people who work here now full-time. 80% are veterans, first responders, or direct family members. And then there's me. There's a few others of us, but there's like me. And I'm supposed to be, the CEO. And it's like, and the why behind that is that in the depths of my struggle, the people, and it wasn't just, but the people who were really, really essential in making sure that not only did I stay alive, but I found that I had strength and courage and my way, were veterans. And there was no reason, like I had this thought one day that like when I was in the dark, the cavalry literally came. Like, I don't know why, but they came. Like literally, EOD guy, 82nd Airborne guy, Army Apache pilot, like they came and found me and like helped me get out of the darkness. And I was like, what an amazing, crazy, unlikely circumstance. And in the process of that, and in the process of getting spent time with people who are so service focused, I found people who not only I deeply admire, but I feel deeply at home with. And we did a workshop recently, and someone said that they were 60 years old. This is for people who work here, people 60 years old, and I finally found my people. And it was like to find my people and to feel like I have this honorary guest pass into this community that I value, not because of what people do, but who they are as human beings and their character and their sense of service and their sense of integrity. it's amazing, right? Because I know that a lot of people struggle in the world to find really good people, and I don't have that problem. It's like I know the wealth I have in my life is that I have far more people that I love dearly than I have time to spend time with them. But it doesn't matter because when you see them, it's as if you never didn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been the blessing of my life to get to be part of that. And there still remains, I think about like you said, like, but for the grace and guidance of some amazing human beings, my story could have ended up very, very differently, right? With a mom and a father who loved me dearly, who, when they had nothing, they made sure my brother and I had every opportunity to bring our gifts into the world. Like, I'm certainly grateful for the people that were a part of my life, and Ken was a big part of that too, right? And so that's why, like, I feel like I owe a debt, but it's not the sort of debt that's oppressive or you wish away. It's like the best kind of debt because it's the one that you love getting to pay back each and every day, which is like all I do is just do what I, we're called to do and help people and like, do what we do. And then along the way, you just get to meet amazing people and spend time with them and learn about them and their stories. And so it's just been the greatest blessing. And I have this thought that, we don't know what happens when we die. And I was talking about this with a group the other day. They're like, this is a heavy conversation. I'm like, I don't know. It's like, maybe I'm a weird person. And I was like, I guess at the end, my hope would be that I'd be willing to do it all over.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly say, like, sitting here, however long I have, which hopefully I have a long time, is I would do all of it to get to this point right here and now. And that's, I think, like the best part of it. I wouldn't try to change pieces because it would change the whole thing. It's like, I would do all of it. You wish you could be a little smarter and sort of tell yourself things and be like, hey, you probably shouldn't let this happen or that happen. But like it all conspired to get me here. And that is a place of great joy and meaning and purpose. So.
Jiminy. Okay. Well, I'm fighting big time not to just like burst into tears. I just think it's profound for me too, because I'm only here because of you and Ken. And so just listening to you talk about that, it's really like we were talking about with some of the team members yesterday. It's just the ripple effect that, like you said, the people that had this impact on you and allowed you to kind of keep finding a way to keep moving forward. And it's the same for me, that you've had such a profound impact on me and my journey. So I'm glad you didn't stop at job or career and that you kept going towards calling, because this is certainly it for you. So thanks for letting me be a part of it, and thanks for sharing that. And I wanted to tell you what you said earlier about feeling like, you work in this veteran, first responder, military family population, and you weren't one of those. I talked to, I won't say his name, but one of our Stories of Transformation guests before was, a really tough Army guy and comes from a really strong military family. And he said, when he first met you and he just had this idea of you, he was like, who's this guy? This guy doesn't like get it, And then he said he sat down and talked with you, and he was like, no, wait, this is like one of us. This is like one of our people. And you have that impact on so many. So just thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you, Britt. That's deeply meaningful. And I think the one thing I'd add to all of it is, no one's unfinished, right? So you go through your journey, and like there ain't no quota on like bad things in life. And so things happen.
Yeah.
But the thing I took from all of it is like, you have to keep doing the work. And so like when I think about the components that we talk about in Struggle Well, and I think about just Ken and myself, is that this is sort of like how you live, right? You live in community and connection with other people, and you cultivate that sense of trust and consistently educate myself, right? Like, whether it's podcasts and books and conversations with people and traveling, it's like I'm constantly shaping my perspective. And the one thing I have and always have had is this sort of an unquenchable curiosity about all kinds of things, mainly indoor things, but all kinds of things in life. And then I mentioned the engage in a meditation practice twice a day, a gratitude practice, working out. It's like the things that work for me are really important. And I think the best part is that when I do feel like I fell short or I fall short, and we talk about disclosure, is that one of the blessings in my life is there's nothing I could do or not do that I couldn't call somebody and be like, hey, and tell them myself.
Yeah.
And receive, I think, accountability and support. And that is a very comforting feeling in a world where I think 40% of people say they don't have a best friend or someone to call if they're in dire straits. It's like, it's amazing. And I think all of those things continue to evolve this story. And it's certainly, I laugh sometimes because I think maybe sometimes people think I say nice things about Ken because I work for Ken, but I work for Ken because of how I think of him and Julia. And so it's like the greatest blessing to be able to partner with him and Julia and get to be like a custodian of something that's obviously deeply meaningful to them, because they're certainly like the two the best people I know. And I think he's, I consider meeting Ken the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And it's like, you don't know why it happened, but you're not going to figure that out. It doesn't really matter. You just know that that it changes you and alters you. And everything we talk about, you're the average of the 3 to 5. I mean, like I have a very mighty 3 to 5, and it's probably like 300 to 500 people who make me a better version of myself, but also hold me accountable to one thing above all, which is sort of the through line of my story, and that is being authentic. And we joke as a behind the scenes note for the podcast is I wear the same thing every day. So if I'm wearing a Navy sweatshirt with a Boulder Crest logo on it, it's not because we shot all the things all at the same time. It's because that's literally what I wear every day, because I feel very comfortable wearing it, and I get to be the same person every day. And if I'm not, the people were around. The same reason why Dusty looked at me and told me to unfuck myself is because they can see through you. And if you're fake or false in these communities, you're dead. Like, you're done. And especially if you're not from them, right? I don't get that grace. Exactly. What better check on me and my sort of prior drive that got me to some bad places was being false. It's like, it's the best check in the world. It's like, okay, well, you better be real and honest, because if you're not, then the people around you will know and care that you're not. And I think that that's another amazing blessing too. So I think that, but sort of as the concluding thought is like, we're all unfinished. And so, many of the books that are behind us are like my books and things that I read, and constantly seeking to shape my perspective and continue to shape my perspective. Because if you don't, and life dries up, right, you're going to have some problems. And if you think that you're beyond struggle, like, you're not. And so it's like just realizing that you just have to, as they like to say, stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
I love it. Well, we should say thank you to Ken. Thank you, Mort. Good job, Josh. All those people, you're 3 to 5.
Exactly.
3 to 500.
Yes, exactly. All the people who made a huge impact on my life.
And we did cover almost all of your story here, but it should be said that if people want to hear more or learn more about you, we did also write your story, I did, which is now on the website. So you can also go there at bouldercrest.org and read more stories like Josh's.
Thanks, Britt.
Thank you.